Welcome, everyone, to Sunday Morning at the Marxist Library. A quick note before we start. This session is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube with a link to our website, ICSSmarx.org, within the next few days. In pre-pandemic times, this weekly program was hosted for 15 years at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library located in Oakland, California, USA. We now meet every Sunday morning on Zoom. You can sign up for email notifications for future programs and view video recordings of past programs at our website, ICSSmarx.org. And I would like to start off by saying that we always welcome input, feedback, suggestions for topics and speakers. My name is Alan Miller. I'm a member of the program committee that organizes Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library. Since we're now on Zoom, we have speakers and participants from throughout the US and around the world. So I want to wish you all a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Before we start, we want to remind you that this is a comradely forum for political discourse and debate. As such, we ask that you show respect to our participants and the moderator of today's session. Please note that the opinions expressed are those of the speaker and participants. They do not necessarily represent those of the ICSS or Marxist Library. Our session today is the U.S. headed for low-intensity civil war? Our speaker is Al Sargis, a past presenter on Sunday morning sessions, and is the founder of the Friedrich Engels Institute for Marxist War and Military Analysis. We're going to start this morning with a presentation by Al, followed by a short break for announcements, followed by questions, answers, and comments from participants. So at that, I'd like to welcome Al to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, depending on where you are. And to those who this topic is about, good riddance. I preface this by saying that I'm going to talk a lot about the reactionary right wing, and as I go through it, there's not necessarily going to be rhyme or reason, and not necessarily a conclusion, but you might view the conclusion as the body of what I say, and I'll just stop when the time is up, and in Q&A maybe we can bring up some of the stuff that I did not include. First of all, let me say that Rahua is the only thing that's going to stop the mud people and their Zog government to implement the 14 words. Anybody understand what I said? If you're a member of the reactionary right, chances are you understood most of it, if not all of it. If you're read in the subject, you'd understand it. Let me just translate it. Rahoa, meaning racial holy war. Mud people, meaning non-whites. Zogs, meaning Zionist organized government. In the 14 words, we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. So in other words, to translate it, holy war is needed to get rid of the non-whites under their Jewish government to implement the existence of our people and a future for our white children. The scope of the reactionary right is just as complex as that of the broad left. If I was going to talk, say, to you about the broad left, say all the way from left liberals to socialists, social democrats, Marxists, anarchists, in this amount of time, you would say, no, you can't really say too much about all these groups, their ideologies, their conflicts, their issues, et cetera, et cetera. And that's true. And the same thing can be said about the broad right. The right wing is just as varied and complex, and hence I'm going to only present some general statements and broad outline of them. Just to clarify, by radicals, I mean those who want to change the system to some future state of existence. And by reactionaries, I mean those who want to change the system to some previous state of existence, whether that was imagined or real. The broad right, as far as I'm concerned, or the reaction, I should say the reactionary right, are those who are close to or members of the Freedom Caucus and the Republican Party and stretch further to the right to cover white supremacists, male supremacists, religious nationalists, Western or European supremacists, neo-Confederates, and so forth. In other words, it covers persons who are against non-European immigrants, who are nativists, nationalists, anti-Jewish, anti-Islam, anti-LGBTQ+, anti-women or feminists. Some of these groups might focus on one or two of these particular issues, but most of them comprise almost all of these traits. That is, they're against most of these groups and seek to overthrow and subjugate, if not totally eliminate, these other groups. First, something about size and influence. The reactionary right has been considered, at least since the late 1990s and the early 2000s, as the greatest domestic threat. And this is by hundreds of social scientists, plus people in the Justice Department and Homeland Security. I'll give you an example. Politically motivated violence against people and property between 2000 and 2020 show that 89% of these violent actions were conducted by the reactionary right, 3% by the left, and 8% by Islamic jihads. So it's pretty much across the board, whether it's by social science researchers, law enforcement, whoever, that the greatest threat to this country comes domestically, and it comes from the reactionary right. Now, something about their size. Since the 1970s, hundreds of reactionary groups have existed. As I say, hundreds. About 70 to 90,000 are members of these groups. Hundreds of thousands of more are not members, but adhere to the central ideas of these groups. People that we call lone wolves, or what I would call wolf packs. And plus, there are about 38 to 40 million other people in the United States who believe in some of their central ideas. Now, that might not seem like it's too much among, say, 300 million people, but you have to realize that many of these folks are determined to act. Many have acted in mass murders, and they are organized. And that's why they're a threat. In terms of their class origin or class composition. Now, there's a number of studies on this, and I'm just going to try to give you the kind of the summary position. About 51% are from the working class. And it's interesting to note that the head of the UAW said that in the last election, 30% of UAW members voted for Trump. Well, 47% are petty bourgeois. And by that, I mean mainly self-employed persons or persons who are small employers. And about 2% are capitalists. That is, they come from the reactionary capitalist sector, such as the Mercer family. And you might include some top executives in corporations among those in the capitalists. Now, there's a close relationship between the working class and the petty bourgeoisie. Many of them overlap. For example, I once knew a longshoreman in Boston who worked on the docks in the daytime, and at night he owned a small bar, and he tended that bar with his wife. Now, he was a member of the petty bourgeoisie because he was a small owner, but at the same time, he was a worker. That's one indication of a closeness of these two groups. Also, some switch from the working class to the petty bourgeoisie. For example, plumbers who can no longer, plumbers who are, say, self-employed and can no longer maintain themselves might seek employment from another company and give up their own self-employment. These people move from one to the other and back again. For example, farm owners who go broke often become farm laborers. And if they're able to gather a little bit of money, they might buy a few acres and become farmers again. Okay, so those two classes, the petty bourgeoisie and the working class, are very close. And even though the petty bourgeoisie is considered by many to be the base of the reactionary right, their relationship to the working class is pretty tight. Another factor or another faction within the reactionary right are military and police. About 9% of those arrested at the January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol were related to the military or police, either present members or former members. There was a disproportionate number, excuse me, of the military vets in these groups, especially after the Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan wars. Some argued that because they returned to a society which has changed or doesn't accept or appreciate them, it makes them more susceptible to returning to a real or imagined society from which they came. For some reactionary groups, these persons for some reactionary groups, these ex-military are actively sought. And speaking about actively sought, some of the groups send their members into the military in order to recruit other members of the military and to steal weapons and other military assets for these groups. Likewise, some of them have sent their members into the police department to recruit other police to their views and to position them in any future kind of conflict so that they are in a position over their opponents and are in key positions for a future racial holy war. Youth, not just because of their age and because they have a long way to go potentially in terms of their life, but also because of their susceptibility, they are recruited. They're seen as more impulsive, more willing to take risks, breaking from adult norms, rebelling against adult expectations, and seeking to fit into a community where they are accepted, but at the same time, not only accepted into the radical, into the reactionary right community, but that they are more pliable. I connect with people in the reactionary right that are in these groups through their websites, or increasingly, you don't even have to go to their websites to find them. And they often tell me about how many young high school kids they have, and how difficult the young high school kids are to control and to train. I take it with a grain of salt how many they really have, but I don't take it with a grain of salt that they actively recruit them. Reactionaries troll for youths in gaming chat rooms, concerts, youth festivals, combat sports, mixed martial arts clubs, political clubs like the Young Republicans, as well as colleges and high school campuses. In Europe, such groups, such youth radical or reactionary youth groups often claim parks or neighborhoods as their own space. And also they have their own summer camps and combat training exercises. Something about women. Women in these groups are subordinated to men. Their main role is to produce white Christian heterosexuals. They are relegated to homemaking and social support roles. That is, for example, social support role might be like writing storybooks or drawing cartoons of a racist nature to nurture their kids into white supremacy and to Western heterosexual Christian ideology. Women also often support dating websites. Yeah, dating websites specifically related to future mothers and fathers of white offspring so that they can get together, right? Just like normal dating websites, seek out, quote, normal people. Women also do cooking shows on YouTube. You might get to a cooking show on YouTube and not realize that it's a white supremacist woman who's doing it. There are telltale signs, usually in the language that she might talk about. But why cooking classes? And that's because some white supremacist groups believe that healthy living, especially among youths, means healthy food, including being vegetarians, not drinking alcohol, and staying off drugs. That does not apply to all reactionaries. There are certain reactionary youth groups that do drugs and excuse me, do drugs, drink alcohol, and the like. Women in reactionary groups, by and large, accept their role and relationship, and rationalize these roles. If they really differ with these roles, they usually quit those groups. Something about their major ideologies. I'd say the two that I want to emphasize are one, the Great Replacement theory, and two, the theory of white genocide. These two theories are viewed as existential threats to the dominant white Christian male Western European civilization groups, that they focus on decline, disintegration, and chaos. Victimization is also part of the ideology of these groups. They aim to protect and defend their space, territory, and homeland. Often they will say things like, we support blood and soil. Recognize those terms, blood and soil, directly out of Nazi ideology of Hitler, right? And what it means, of course, is whites having their own ethno-state. Now, the Great Replacement theory was first advanced in 2011 in a book by the same name by a French author who was wrote it in opposition to immigrants from the global South. You might say it was MAGA, make Europe great again. Get the catch? Change one word, change the E to A, and it's MAGA, right? So you see the similarity. Again, in the Great Replacement theory, there's a sense of nostalgia for an often imaginary past to which they want to return. They want to restore their homeland to what they see as the purity of what it was before. Their theory encompasses anger, resentment, brotherhood, and purpose. Okay? Anger, resentment, brotherhood, and purpose, which is an ideal formula for recruiting those whose sense of belonging and whose future may be clouded. This is why youth, combat vets, etc., seem more susceptible to these groups. They form a shared mission on a global basis and foster international communications, interconnections, you find Americans going to Europe, Europeans coming to the United States and interacting, besides interacting on their websites. And they try to motivate each other into violent actions. Some believe in acceleration, which means speeding up the process, speeding up discord, which is designed to further undermine stability, create chaos. And they believe that out of this chaos, they can begin to move in the direction of creating their own ethno-state. There's also the vision of a coming civil war and end times, both on the fringes of the reactionaries as well as among their core adherents. Even among elected politicians and news media, mass media news pundits, we find these kinds of ideas, not just among Nazis. The other day, I read daily articles about them. For example, the other day I read about 2 Arizona state senators who openly supported the idea of the Great Replacement theory. So, as I say, these ideas become more normalized in political discourse and become more acceptable, and more, at least acceptable in the sense of being discussed and being considered seriously. A couple of more aspects to be clarified concerning ideology, one concerning Jews, one concerning Asians. Jews play a prominent role as the enemy in these groups. Jews, and most of these groups, are not considered, quote, white. Whites, to them, were created by a white God in the form of Adam and Eve. Jews were created by a sexual union of a non-white Satan and Eve, and hence are non-white, maybe not even semi-human. As far as Asians go, Asians are considered inferior in the racial hierarchy. And one of the main rationalizations is that whites are creators and Asians are imitators or copiers of white creations. Therefore, they are subordinate to whites. All other groups are considered backward, destructive, benevolent. So therefore, intermarriage only produces, quote, half-breeds, and certainly persons that are what they call less Nordic, Teutonic, and Anglo persons. Now, reinforcing ideology is done through group symbols and other paraphernalia. This is done on an international basis through such things as the sale of clothing, various kinds of in-group symbols, music videos, books, video games, speeches by prominent leaders, and so forth. They have their own record, clothing, and video producing companies and radio and television programs around the world. So examples of in-group symbols on clothing, which show that they walk among us and most persons don't recognize them. For instance, one symbol is an ancient Norse god. Okay, that is the head of an ancient Norse god, which might be on somebody's sweater or jacket. And that Norse god symbolizes racial superiority, racial purity, and racial lineage. And sometimes as anti-Islamic symbols, you'll find on their clothes a picture of a crusader in armor and with a sword and so forth. You also find numbers and words on clothing. For example, 88, Nipster, N-I-P-S-T-E-R, and 2 as number 2, Y-T, number 4, U. Translation. 88, the 8th letter of the alphabet is H. 2 H's, H, Heil Hitler. Nipster are Nazi hipsters. 2 YT for you, 2 white for you. Now, you can see somebody, if you see somebody walking down the street with a sweater on, and it says 88 on his shoulder, and it shows somebody with a Norse god on the front of his sweater, you just might look at it and say, oh, this person might be a member, a supporter of a certain football team or something else, and not understand what the symbol means. However, those other persons who are hip to these symbols, because they are members or adherents of these groups, recognize this right away and know that it's one of their own. Okay, that's why I say they walk among us, and most of us are completely oblivious about it. Now, these items are sold in mainly online in the United States, Australia, Canada, and Europe. For example, 47 Russian cities have websites that sell these kinds of items. Now, a word about groups and loners. Groups and loners. In 2019, 478 groups of reactionaries in 48 states existed. And it's estimated that there are far more now than 478. Their names, like the Order, Aryan Brotherhood, Proud Boys, Three Percenters, Boogaloo Bros, Oath Keepers, Wolverines, Hammerskins, Christian Identity. I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, there are hundreds of names, perhaps even thousands. Okay, and to discuss each specific ideology in each particular quirk of this group would take 5 hours. Now, in a sense, then, it doesn't, I should say, some of these groups change their names over time. Other groups dissolve and are reborn under different names. In a sense, it doesn't make a difference because basically, as I said before, their ideologies overlap. People also gravitate from one group to another, and some are simultaneously in more than one group. For example, the Oklahoma bomber, Timothy McVeigh, who was one of the persons who got a lot of publicity, if you recall, because of his bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City. He was a member of the KKK, a member of the Michigan militia, and a member of an elite guard group that protected leaders of still other groups. In other words, he belonged to at least 3 groups, okay? And he floated among them. And I'd say that's pretty typical. But more than the tens of thousands in these groups are the additional hundreds of thousands of loners. Loner is a misnomer because these so-called loners read the websites, literature, and communicate with members of more formal groups. All the reactionary killers and bombers, such as the ones, I would say, like for example, in El Paso, the one in New Zealand who attacked the mosque, the one in Pittsburgh that attacked a Jewish synagogue, okay, and various others who have murdered people on an individual or mass basis. These persons have always left manifestos who refer to the websites of groups as their inspiration, as well as to other persons who've done the same kinds of violence as their inspiration. So I say there's no such thing as a lone wolf. All the lone wolf individuals that seem to be unattached to various groups are actually intimately connected with those groups. Now, a few words on organization. Some, like the Oath Keepers, are top-down, have a top-down military style of organization, but the majority do not. They follow what might be called the Bible of Reactionaries, which is the Turner Diaries by William Pierce, who was a white supremacist who wrote the Turner Diaries in the early 1970s. It was written as a novel, which laid out in detail the organization, recruitment strategies, and actions for a race war to achieve white supremacy and a white ethno-state within the United States. Pierce recommended groups divide into small 3 or 4 person cells, which operate independently, but are connected to each other through a common ideology and the knowledge of what other cells and individuals are doing. That way, an organization's leadership will not be blamed or detected. It's a form of guerrilla warfare that would lead to a racial holy war and the defeat of non-whites, and what they call a day of the rope. A day of the rope mean after they're taking over the United States or part of the United States, or another country, that there would be a rope for all the members of the Jewish organized government and their white traitor supporters. This is openly spoken about by people that I talk with that are members of these groups. And we often end up online, I might add, okay? I'm not speaking to them directly, but we often end up, how shall I say, threatening each other, because I make no bones about it. If I ever saw them, if they ever acted, that's why I'm armed. Now, some researchers have listed counter remedies to deal with these groups. These researchers, and including people in law enforcement, are not radicals. At best, liberals, maybe social democrats. So their remedies to counter the reactionaries are rather limited. First is arrest, imprisonment, and perhaps the death of the leadership. The example would be the January 6th insurrectionists who were convicted. That is, for example, the leaders of the Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, 3%ers, and others are in jail or facing the trials. The major problem of lopping off the leadership is that the cell structure of these organizations keep operating as either lone wolves or in undetected cells, which are not dependent on leaders. The law enforcement, especially the FBI and certain segments of the Homeland Security, have units that are directed against reactionary groups, primarily by infiltrating them and attempting to stop their actions before they start, and of course, trying to indict and bring them to trial. Secondly, as a way to deal with them is the suggestion that you train persons in key positions to spot youth that are susceptible or that are, let's say, spouters of reactionary ideologies. This is very weak in the United States. It's more advanced in Germany. And I'll give you a few examples. all teachers in Germany, as part of their teacher education and ed school, are trained to deal with reactionary youth or youth that appear to be susceptible to reactionary thinking. Coaches in youth sports clubs, mixed martial arts gyms, and other young adult sports venues are trained. That is, coaches, German coaches are trained to spot these young people and try to deal with them in various ways, depending upon the depth of their ideology or whether they're just like toying with those ideas. They discuss youth, or they discuss with youth things about racism, immigration, reactionary ideology, etc. And so they tend to be much more advanced. In the United States, we haven't even begun to think about how to deal with youth that we might encounter in various institutions. And finally, organizing to create a social democracy. That is, researchers recommend that the working classes of all races, ethnicities, religions, immigrant status, etc., are included in some forms of organizing to create a situation where, I was going to say in shorthand, to create basic income, occupation, family assistance, health care, and other floorboards in society that no one can fall below. Their model basically are the Scandinavian countries and certain other European countries that have these broad floorboards. Now, how much time?
It's 11:14.
11 what?
14.
Oh, well, I'm going to stop. I've kind of like given an overview. I could go into much more detail, but that should be more than enough to begin a Q&A and various comments concerning what I said, and maybe clarification, and maybe I can amplify on certain things that I left out. But thank you very much.
Okay, okay, thank you, Al. Just a couple of quick announcements before we proceed. One of the things I want to remind everybody is that if you want to ask a question or make a comment, go to the bottom of your Zoom window and you'll see a reactions button where you can raise your hand. And I can see that we already have some hands that have been raised. I would, excuse me, if you want to make a comment, go ahead and raise your hand and we will get to everybody. Just a few quick announcements. First of all, next week we have a session on the 200th anniversary of the Monroe Doctrine. And speaking will be Mark Albertson, who has spoken at the library many times, a very popular speaker, very timely topic since we're now at the 200th anniversary of the Monroe Doctrine. The following week, on November 26th, we'll be having no session. It's the holiday weekend. If you want to receive email notifications for future programs, go to our website at ICSSmarx.org. When you go to the website, a small pop-up box will come up and you can add your name and email address and you'll receive a weekly reminder with a Zoom link for each of our upcoming programs. You can also go to our website to view past programs and to send us a message through our contact form. Okay, so with that, what we're going to do is we'll go over to Q&A, and I think I'm going to start with Kim. So Kim, if you, oops, hold on, let me go ahead and allow everybody to unmute themselves. So Kim, if you would unmute yourself and ask your question, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Al, for all your research and your presentation. I wanted to ask you if you did any research about international connections between some of these domestic groups that you were describing, because, for instance, we know towards the beginning of the Ukraine war, there was information about the Azov battalion in Ukraine training some American, whatever you'd like to call them, neo-Nazis who went over there. And also Trump sponsored Viktor Orban. He came over here in 2022, I think it was, and gave a speech in front of some conservative convention in Dallas. So I was wondering if you had any research about international links or connections. Thanks.
Okay. I've read some stuff about groups in other countries and their interconnections, but I would say that is kind of a weak point in my research. But I will make a comment. I said in the body of my talk that the groups in, say, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and most European countries have connections with each other. Some of them have visited other countries. Americans have visited, Americans have gone to other, say, European countries in which they have had direct mutual discussions, conferences, and like I said, they go to their websites in order to get paraphernalia. You mentioned Ukraine. Well, I'll mention Ukraine and Russia because I think it's something very ironic here. But and that is, yes, there have been Americans that have gone to Ukraine in part to work with or get training from or to exchange ideas with the Azov, I think I call itself battalion now, as well as the Ukrainian right sector. Together, those groups comprise maybe about 7,000 to 9,000 people. I mean, it's not like a huge number of folks, but Americans have gone there and and held conferences with them. They've also gone to Russia. As Americans have gone to Russia, there are a number of these groups, particularly centered around St. Petersburg. There's one group which hit the press recently was called the Russo Militia. And they were complaining about one of their leaders being detained in Finland. But they also have been involved in fighting in Ukraine. And what I see as ironic is that on the one hand, you find these kinds of folks fighting, say, in Ukraine, fighting Russians. And on the other hand, you find Russian reactionaries fighting in Ukraine. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I can tell you that the Russians are primarily concerned about immigrants coming in from Asia. And they're also very concerned about stopping, and I mean stopping, I mean beating up and even killing Asians who come from Russian republics into Moscow, St. Petersburg, etc. Right? But the interaction I know is at least from moderate to great, but I can't give you a whole lot of detail on it.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, next up is Kit, followed by Raj. So Kit, if you would go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Al, for speaking and sharing your research with us. Can you also post some of your resources on the chat? Also, I'm wondering about how how these people are organizing in prisons. I would think it would be best to put them in isolated cells, but anyway, can you comment on what's going on in the prisons with these folks?
Sure.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, I didn't bring any resources to share with you on chat. Most of my resources, my best ones are about 7 books that I've read on the subject, plus, I don't know, dozens and dozens of articles. But as far as prisons goes, the Aryan Brotherhood in prisons have been around for at least, I would say, since the 1950s, maybe the late 50s, certainly into the early 60s, which organizes originally as prison gangs to protect whites, just like there are Black prison gangs, Hispanic prison gangs. Ostensibly, they say that they're there so that the self-defense can be enhanced. But what they do is also they promote not just the protection of whites, but they promote this white supremacy ideology. And when they are released from prison, they often go into white supremacist groups. And there is an interaction between these reactionary groups in prison and out of prison. I mean, for example, many of the reactionary folks who've been involved in murders or involved in armed robberies or involved in counterfeiting, blowing up buildings, attacking infrastructure like power lines and so forth, power grids. If they're caught, or if they're prevented from being caught and thrown in jail, okay, they just go in and start promoting their ideology among others. And they'll become part of the Aryan Brotherhood, but their ideas are more, how should I say, more fresh, more advanced. Their experiences are more real, and they can promote those ideas within prisons, so that when other white Aryans come out, right, that they form kind of like a reinforcement among those who've never been to prison. Okay, so there is a close interaction between them. I hope that that's sufficient.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was wondering too about since there are police in prison, do they, form alliances with these gangs?
Well, who specifically? He's talking about formal alliances.
Well, like right-wing, police who, probably would agree with some racist ideas of theirs.
Perhaps, I mean, they try to recruit others other whites who might not be part of those groups into their thinking. That I would say that the interaction between those that are out and are eventually caught and end up in prison, plus those that are already in prison already, and when they get out, get involved in these groups, that this is very close. But those that are in prison certainly try to recruit other whites and try to foment rivalry between prison gangs.
Okay. Next up is Raj, followed by Dave Walters. So Raj, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Al. So I have 4 questions. May I just, first is...
One at a time.
One at a time, okay.
Yeah.
First one is, what are the numbers in the United States of these reactionary groups all combined, different shades, the ones that want to establish a white ethno-nationalist state? What are the numbers, would you say, if you have an estimate?
Okay. Let me repeat what I said. That there are between 70 and 90,000 members of these groups, persons that are actually in these groups. Okay, and at the same time, there are hundreds of thousands of persons who are not members of these groups, but who adhere to all their basic ideas. And a third, that there are between 38 and 40 million people who believe in some of these ideas, okay, but maybe not others. Those who believe in their ideas, even in groups, would not commit violence in order to adhere to them. For example, a lot of Christian nationalists would not advocate violence to promote their beliefs. But at the same but there are at the same time persons that are called Christian identity groups which do advocate violence. There are Christian nationalists who don't advocate racism and who have Blacks and Hispanics in those groups. There are other Christian nationalists that are racists. All of these groups, however, I would say, or at least most of them in these groups that would not advocate violence, silently applaud those who do advocate violence because it furthers their cause.
My second question, thank you. Second question, you didn't mention the lumpen proletariat, which was
who?
lumpen, L-U-M-P.
Oh, yeah.
Lumpens. So, which you said if I got it correctly, 31% are workers that may even belong to unions. Capitalists are 2%, and petty bourgeoisie is the largest group. So, in times of capitalist crisis, such as we are witnessing in the United States for 2-3 decades, there is a lumpenization going on, and so some comment on that. Can you clarify your class categories and then some numbers, a percentage, what falls into it?
Okay. Yeah, I agree that lumpenization is going on, and that persons in the lumpens can go either way, or many different ways. They're not how should I say, a solid block. All right, lumpens are kind of more like on an individualistic basis. And some may be susceptible to right-wing thinking, some may be susceptible to left-wing thinking. But I do not know, at least I've never read anything concerning their numbers, but other than agreeing with you that they exist and are increasing in chaotic situations, yeah, I would agree, and that they are, some of them are susceptible to reactionary thinking. Yes, I agree, but you have to realize that also that because of their individualistic views, they're not always reliable as members of organizations. Sometimes they may be lone wolves, but I would say in general, it's a subject that really should be explored, and I have not found much, many researchers that have explored that situation.
Raj, I'm going to go to the next question, or you can circle back. We'll get back to you. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Next up is David, followed by Mehmet. So David, if you would unmute yourself. There you
Got
go.
it. It's nice to put a face to the name, Al, since we correspond on his military Marxism list.
Oh, you're the David Walters.
Yeah, I'm that guy.
Okay.
So I really appreciate the amount of research. I don't know how many showers you must have taken after doing that, because you just feel dirty reading about these groups. So I just wanted to make a few comments. And first of all, women are quite involved with this, but not at the levels in which you mentioned. If you go to UC Berkeley, Al lives near there, you'll see the GOP tabling Republican youth. And oftentimes it's all women. So at the level of electoral politics, in fact, most women elected to the last Congress come from the far right of the GOP. That's the GOP's become this sort of like, yeah, we promote women kind of a thing. And it's part of their thing. Also, when I go to, I'm part of the John Brown Gun Club, and I used to be, and I used to go to the range with my comrades, and we'd shoot targets, and there were always these right wingers who were there. A lot of women were part of that too, and you can tell by the patches they wear on their camouflage uniforms. But I mean, one of the overarching things about this, two things I wanted to point out, is that of the groups that Al has been specifically talking about, they are extremely well armed. We're talking about legal military and sometimes illegal assault rifle type weapons of varying sorts. And when you put that together with 25% of GOP voters who believe that it will take violence to correct the flaws in the election, it is at least a mirepoix of ingredients for some really violent stuff. And I will argue, probably with the exception of Al and myself, most leftists I know are not armed, and we're certainly not organized in any way whatsoever in any kind of defensive formulation. And this could be a problem down the road. I don't think it is now. The sheer number of people who are involved with this is daunting, but the sheer number of groups works against this. If you actually looked at the October 6th insurrection, nobody knew what the fuck they were doing. That's clear. They had a general direction, and you had 1 million different individuals and 150,000 groups and individuals marching into the Capitol, and a 1,000 or so march in with no direction whatsoever. It is really hard to prove conspiracy. I would argue with that. But that's true nationally. I think one of the things you were looking for when you were talking about in the past was Timothy McVeigh, when he blew up the federal building in Oklahoma City. Immediately, all the militia groups around the country shut down. Members dropped out. But with January 6th of 2021, nobody dropped out. In fact, it was a recruiting grounds for these far right people, and it is very, very scary. No one person has come around, except Trump on the electoral level, to unite these organizations, and I'm very grateful that it reminds me of the left a little bit. They'd rather fight with each other than actually organize their supporters. If you want to know, for Raj's sake, how many people we're talking about, if you total up the number of people who go to Trump rallies, that's the closest thing you'll see to the actual number of truly deplorable human beings, members of our species in North America. And, it's probably 1 to 200,000 is what I'm thinking of. Or, 3 or 4% of the voters for Trump. And those Trump people, when Trump said, I could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and my supporters will applaud me, he was not exaggerating. He can say anything. He can reverse his positions on things. One of the odd things is that Trump's daughter is Jewish, converted, and she married an Orthodox Jewish guy. It stymies somewhat the anti-Semitism of the far right, not of the groups Al was specifically talking about, but it's prevented it from really seeping in to this. DeSantis, for instance, in Florida, the governor of Florida, to the right of Trump, gets awards from the Zionist Organization of America and other Jewish groups all the time. So they're not relying on anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, even though it's mass-based, is still a little bit of an outlier within the far right. They might get a wink and a nod, but no one's really organizing around. Anyway, that's it.
Okay. Thank you for the comments. And let me just address a couple of them. Taking a bath after reading, or especially after talking with these folks. It's you have to it's like going into battle in ancient times. You have a suit of armor on, and that suit of armor deflects certain things, and my suit of armor deflects their how should I say, deflects the impact of their ideas on my own emotion or my own psyche. I mean, you have to have a certain level of protection, because when it gets down to talking with most of these people, at a certain point, I know they're going to start calling me a Jewish tranny, anti-American, whatever, ever, and so I just accept it. That's what they're going to say, and I kind of like say certain swear words back at them about how I think about them, but that's just part of the interaction. Either that or I don't communicate with them at all. Now, you mentioned about you belong to the John Brown Gun Club. For more than a decade, I've been advocating persons on the left becoming members of the John Brown Gun Club or the Socialist Rifle Association, that we need such persons around, particularly mass demonstrations, because at times, if they're physically attacked by members of the right, members of the right might attack them with guns. And the police don't always intervene. They're not reliable to protect you, and so you have to bring your own protection. Keep them, on the sidelines, not obvious. But that's something I've advocated for. I say for more than a decade, maybe 2 decades. Falls on mostly deaf ears, I might add. On women. Yes. I forget the particular point you said.
At the level of electoral politics, you see a lot more women.
Yeah, okay. Since women are one of the targets, especially I've noticed that in a lot of young Republican clubs, women are either the majority or are in the leadership of these groups. And groups like right-wing groups like the so-called alt-right, which is a guy named Richard Spencer, who believed that that they should maintain a, well, how shall I say, an organizational approach to groups like the Young Republicans, and they have how shall I say, they know that women are very important, that women can influence not only other women, but women can influence men in these organizations. Something else that you said, oh yeah, the role of Trump and the alt-right. The alt-right and Richard Spencer was one of the first of these groups to approach Trump positively. Many of these groups are totally anti-government. And so Trump didn't mean a thing. I mean, Trump was just another member of the government. But others began to change their minds. Others began to say, maybe Trump is useful. Maybe he'll push our agenda a little bit more. And so they began to develop a more positive attitude towards organizing in, quote, conventional groups. Richard Spencer, for example, was so enthused about them that he and some other neo-Confederates, neo-Nazis, Klan types, who later became part of that march in Charlottesville, Virginia. Prior to that, when Trump had his inauguration, they actually had a ball, which they called the Ball for the Disposables. And all these groups attended that ball, and there are photos of them exchanging Nazi salutes, at the ball, and so on and so forth, which shows how they viewed Trump as not as their ultimate goal, but to use Trump as a force to move the conventional political discussion more towards their direction, and as a tool to recruit from those groups. The governor of Florida, the name escapes me right now. What's his name?
DeSantis.
DeSantis, right. I viewed him as more threatening than Trump. Not too many people notice that DeSantis comes from a working class family. DeSantis knows how to relate to the working class. He might have gotten a scholarship to Yale and whatever, right? But his father installed electrical equipment, right? But he has a better idea of how to approach people in the working class than does Trump. Trump's politics are all about Trump. I have a friend who worked for Trump, who I originally met when he was a student at Boston University in film. He became the film director for Trump's program. And I happened to meet him in, I think, around 2010, 2011. And I said, oh, you work for this guy, Trump, in which I didn't know Trump from nothing other than he was some rich real estate guy. And he said, yeah. I said, well, what's Trump like? He said, well, he's intellectually vacuous. He's totally self-absorbed, and he's an artful con man. And so when Trump ran for office, I kind of knew what to expect in terms of who Trump was on a personal basis. You also mentioned something about in relationship to some of these groups that are armed, and that in Michigan that showed up at various legislative meetings with guns and so forth. On a previous talk that I gave, I said that I predicted the January 6th. Now, that was a little bit exaggerating, but I'll tell you, I predicted something was going to happen that was on the scale of the attempted kidnapping of the governor of Michigan. The people that did that were members of the, quote, Wolverines, which is the Michigan militia. And the Michigan militia is tied into white supremacist groups in Michigan. And so it didn't surprise me that that there was even though they failed, that there was a potential for something even greater on a national scale that was similar to a kidnapping. And it's true that these groups went down in terms of their number right after the Tim McVeigh was caught and went to jail and then executed. That's true, they went down. But then they started in the early 2000s, the group started to increase again. And it's difficult, to me, it's difficult to say that they have decreased since then, because all the data shows that they've increased in number and size since at least the after the year 2000. And in part, like I tried to intimate, this was due to the way that they're organized, that you can get rid of the top leadership, but the cells of these organizations can operate rather unimpededly, as well as the lone wolves who adhere to these ideologies can operate.
Okay, next questioner is Mehmet. If you would unmute, followed by Bonnie, followed by Janet. So Mehmet, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. And Al, really thank you for bringing the issue up in a very timely manner and also with detail. I believe that the problem is not going to go away, and it's going to get worse. The reason is that the contradictions within capitalism is at such a state that they have no other solution but to go violent. But how violent and how will they implement this violence is going to be dependent on these groups. In the United States, I wonder if you'd like to comment on it, but these groups that you mentioned are still not under the control and direct financial help of the state yet. I don't think that the contradictions in the United States is ripe enough to make them come under the state's influence, financial gains, or organizations, so on and so forth. I just returned from Turkey, and I can see that what you are saying 100 times more there, as the entire country has been given to gangs and these neo-Nazi criminals. When you have religion and nationalism joined forces under a fascist organization that is openly and at every level financed by the government, by the state, then it becomes really problematic. And that is what we call fascism. We have to be ready for that. the reason why I brought Turkey is that the capitalist contradictions that we are seeing in a metropole country is much, much easier and, not as hard as what you would see in a neo-colonial countries. So that's why the organization of these gangs and the Nazis and religious fanatics becomes very mainstream there. And it scared me. I just returned from there last week. It just scared me how much culturally you can change a country using these gangs as well from the very top. That's very important. Organization from the top is that, like a few years ago, the attacks on Palestine, you wouldn't even sweat to have people on your side supporting Palestine. But the hatred against Erdogan has come to such a level that anything that he pretends to even support is now a contention, and people are going against it. Now you have to convince people that Israel is wrong in killing Palestinians. There are a lot of progressive people who want to have the Israeli model implemented in Turkey with the help of these gangs. And today, these gangs in Turkey are, running hospitals. They are running private schools. They are running import-export businesses. The government takes away from what used to be the government enterprises, puts them into funds, and these funds channel it to the very same organizations that you're talking about. This is a top-down organization, and this is what happens. Turkey has become the hub of drug trafficking in the Middle East and Europe now. And these gangs are all involved with the help of the government. Gang leaders have now the flashing police signs, the lights on their cars, so that no traffic or traffic police would ever stop them. And the Ministry of Interior, that would be the state, the Secretary of State of the United States at that level, when there was a coup attempt, he personally calls the leader of a gang, a religious and nationalistic gang, and tells them, this is on record, this is not a dispute, this is on record, and he tells them to bring their guns, go out on the street and defend the state's radio and TV stations. And they do come with their automatic rifles and everything. So the problem is that not in the United States yet, but at a certain point, these gangs, these thugs, are going to be organized, as you mentioned in Trump case. It's going towards that. It has to go towards there, so that a top-down organization of the state joins forces with these gangs, and they control the entire population with thuggery. Thank you.
Okay, I agree with you about 107%. In Europe, the formalization into actual political parties is a lot more advanced than in the United States. For example, in Germany, in Sweden, in Greece, among others, that these political parties run for office, are found in parliament, are found in the local governments. Okay, and in the United States, that has not been the case at this point. But I would say that that is a trend in the United States. And everything else you said about the contradictions of capitalism giving rise to these groups and becoming more part of a state sanctions forces, I agree, and I see that on the horizon, in the United States, and I kind of really push this whole idea about the reactionary right being more powerful, both in fact and in potential in the United States than most people view them. Most people, I think, view them as kooks, small isolated groups that don't have any influence. Okay? I think just the opposite, and certainly the trend is just the opposite. But thank you for those comments.
Alan?
What happened to Alan? Okay, so I think it's Bonnie was there, but maybe Janet.
Yeah, Bonnie,
can-
I'm sorry, I was
Oh,
muted.
okay.
I was listening.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
Okay, can you hear me?
Bonnie, followed by Janet, followed by Sheila. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, just a couple comments. Thank you, Al. That was terrific. We shouldn't forget that we all know that every police department in this country is loaded with KKK members. And we shouldn't forget there's a historical an origin to police departments. What started police departments was slave catchers. When the plantation owners used to pay these guys to go around catching runaway slaves and bringing them back to the plantations. And today we see the killings of unarmed African Americans, men and women both, and some Latinos as well, by mostly white cops, few exceptions, and they're usually not prosecuted. And then we see these mass murderers, like that guy Dylan Rudd was his name, I think, who went into a church, an African-American church where a few dozen people were gathered at a Bible reading, Bible study group, and mass murdered them. Well, in a lot of these cases where there's some guy who goes in and shoots up a bunch of black people, you find that when they do go into the guy's house or talk to his family, he's got Nazi literature all over the place. But then the media covers that up very quickly once they do find that out. And also in the military, and Al, I know you've always advocated for leftists to go into the military and organize and get military members on the side of progressivism. But the military is also loaded with KKK members, and we've seen lots of examples over the decades of them acting at bases, lynching, and slurs, and all kinds of things. And then just one last sort of almost humorous thing. Al, you mentioned the Wolverines in Michigan connected to these right-wing groups. Well, funny thing, my alma mater, University of Michigan, the football team was called the Wolverines. And I don't know if they've changed that name or if it still exists. But anyway, if you can elaborate a bit on the existence of the Klan and so forth in both cop agencies and military. Thanks. That's all.
Okay. I don't know that I have too much more to say on that. Police and the origins of police as slave patrols was also coincided with the origins of police in the North as night watchmen who would eventually evolve into groups or into an organization that would put down groups that were in various forms of rebellion, whether it was labor groups, racial groups or otherwise. And so the police operated it or developed in two parts of the country in somewhat similar direction, but against somewhat different groups. There are 800,000 sworn cops, 800,000. And if you took, people say, oh, it's 1 or 2% are quote bad cops. Well, take 1 or 2% of 800,000. How many thousands would you find that are in police departments that are quote bad apples? But even more so, that there are many more tens of thousands of cops who do not, let's say, squeal on the bad cops because it's in their own interest as police not to inform on others or stop others from illegal actions, or if they know that these cops are in the KKK or similar groups, not to identify them. And I can give you one among many simple reasons. You start to become known as a cop who squeals on other cops for any reason. If you're in a tight situation and you need backup and your life may be threatened, other cops just might not show up, or they'll show up late. Okay? And that's a threat. So, it's best not to say anything, even if you don't agree with the racists who are in the police. Now, how many overt racists? I mean, the racism is a term that's tossed around. And I would say that there are a lot of racists who are called everyday racists, have mild prejudices and so forth. But the racists who are organized and who would act on those beliefs are a minority of them. But they are a serious threat when they are placed in positions where they can carry out violence on other people and do so in supposedly legal organizations like the police, like the military. And the only data that I've seen on the military is that it's estimated that about 25% of the military had persons who adhere to white supremacism on a serious scale, not just average prejudices, but who actually agreed with the white supremacist ideology. And of course, the most dangerous ones are obviously those that are connected with groups who purposely organize within the military and who purposely steal weapons and funnel those weapons to their friends on the outside. And lastly, I mentioned about the left. Yeah, I've for 30 years, I mean, almost ever since I got out of the Marine Corps, I've advocated for the left to organize within the military. But, they've done so more successfully in Europe than in the United States. In the United States, there's what I call the pacifist virus. And that means that a lot of those on the left don't want to have anything to do with the military. And so therefore, to talk about them organizing within the military is something that doesn't gain many connections. The greatest time that there was organization within the military was during Vietnam. And that's because a lot of those on the left were drafted. And so they had to deal with the military because they were already in there. So that's where they organized. But I agree with you. I don't know if I covered all your points, but
We have actually a lot of questioners, so let's go ahead and move on. Janet, followed by Sheila. So Janet, followed by Sheila. Go ahead, Janet.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation, Al, and your work. So much information. I have a few related questions. Following up on the religious component of this, and kind of related to what Mehmet pointed out, when you talk about white supremacy, I assume you mean white Christian supremacy. Zionism is about Jewish supremacy. Can't one look at Zionism as the reactionary right as well? I think the white Christian supremacist reactionary right lumps the Jews and the Arabs and Muslims together and probably wants them all to disappear. But I would think they exalt what Israel is doing in Gaza. The Zionist lobby owns the US Congress and the White House. Do you think what the white Christian supremacist reactionary right wants is to replace the Zionist influence and have in the US the Christian equivalent of Israel? And going back to the title of your talk, is the US headed for a low-intensity civil war? How do you think the white Christian supremacist reactionary right relates to the positional divide among Americans on Israel's genocidal war on Gaza? I know it's a lot.
okay. Just a second. I agree that the white Christian supremacists, right? They are the overwhelming majority of the reactionary right. Right, yeah. But they run into a problem. I mean, to them, Zionism is equated with Judaism. I mean, I've found very few that make a distinction between the two. So when they talk about the Zionist organized government, they don't mean Zionist in terms of how you defined it. They mean Zionist equals Jews. That's okay. I mean, it's a simplistic kind of analysis, but you know, most of their views are how should I say, ultimately simplistic kinds of analysis. The war of Israel on Palestine presents a real problem to them, because since they're both anti-Islam and both anti-Jewish, how do you deal with that? Now, I have seen the some articles about how they have gone into protests against the war on Palestinians, okay? And they have tried to present themselves as pro-Palestinian, okay? But there are enough wise persons in the movement to know that what they're trying to do is to get close to certain groups, to use them as a potential recruits. So I say, yeah, I'm all for Palestine, you know, but they know that the persons that are organizing are not just pro-Palestinians, but have a broader outlook about a single state or other things like of that nature, which they would disapprove of. And it brings up another thing that you didn't mention, but it's related, and that is that a lot of these groups, because they are nationalistic, will come out and say, we're against NATO, defund NATO, get rid of NATO, US out of NATO, okay? And at first, during the Ukraine-Russian war, there were some leftists that were very susceptible to these reactionary folks who were saying this. But they did not realize that when the reactionary folks say end NATO, what they mean is sending those US troops back to the United States to, number one, patrol the borders of Mexico and the United States, and number two, send them to the Indo-Pacific, because they see the real enemy as the, quote, Chinese communist threat, unquote. And so they want those troops in Asia. They don't want them in Europe. And there are among them certain white supremacist subtleties about this, because the Ukrainians and Russians are viewed as white. But those coming up from Latin America and those in Asia, obviously to them, they're not white. And that's where the focus for them should be, is against the non-whites.
Why don't we move on? We have 4 or 5 more people. We only have 15 more minutes left. So
Okay.
next up is Sheila. Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Al. I'm a listener of WBAI radio, and about, 15 or 20 years ago, I heard somebody on the radio talking about where will the left find its people's army? And I'm wondering if it was you, Al. The guest said, well, we do have a people's army, and it consists of veterans who are trained in the military, by the US military, and who come out, and many of whom have seen the light about what the US and its military is all about. And at the time, I tried to get the program director at WBAI to have a radio show for young veterans of the Iraq War. It didn't fly, but if anybody here knows young veterans who would like to do a show on Pacifica, let me know, and we can agitate for that, especially at KPFK. They have a very receptive interim general manager there. But my question is this: I see you have this Friedrich Engels military strategy group, and I'm guessing that you have discussed these questions about how to deal with these issues like the right strategically. And I'm wondering if there have been any examples of successfully dealing with these right-wing fascists and gangs in history anywhere, and what you think of groups like Antifa here in the States, or groups like the Huey P. Newton Gun Club, I think, which operates in Texas. And if you're aware of Black armed groups, and how they are organizing, because my understanding is that during the civil rights movement, there were a number of Black people and or organizations that were armed, despite the appearance of the civil rights movement being pacifist.
Okay, let me deal with just 2 of the points. One was about veterans. Veterans form one of the key components of the anti-war movement. I mean, Veterans for Peace, Veterans Against War, Vietnam Veterans Against the War. I don't know how many others might exist that are, I think, very strategic, because they understand, because of their experience, what war is about. They understand the role of the military within the imperialist government, and their credibility tends to be greater, for better or worse, whether you agree with that or not. Still, their credibility tends to be greater because of their experience. The Black armed groups, that's something that I've also been studied a lot about. The civil rights movement pushed the idea of nonviolent resistance, and that was, yes, the focus. The problem is that the armed aspects of that resistance get pushed in the background, both for let's say public relations reasons and others. But it was true that there were several formal Black groups in Mississippi and Louisiana that were made up of veterans who would stand at the side of the nonviolent groups to protect them primarily from the police. And there were many of these armed Black groups that were simply overlooked. Now, there are a couple of similar groups whose name escapes me right now I believe, in Florida and in Georgia. But I think that they have played a significant role, although unheralded. Unless you read books either by or about them, in which there are several books on that issue. Is there anything else that you wanted me to address?
Just the group that mainly seems to be in the spotlight, and you know, if you read thrillers, they're constantly in there as the bad guys, but Antifa. And before I forget, if you could just tell us about your group that you're in, the Friedrich Engels group, and if people
I am the group.
Oh, you are the group. Oh, I know.
Yeah. No. There was one other person, but he's no longer alive. He passed away. Who was also in the group. But what we do is we're an educational group. We have a website that puts out articles on a daily basis called Marxist Military List. And I try to speak about military issues from the point of view of Marx and Engels, and trying to disseminate their ideas about war and the military, which again are relatively unknown or played down by even Marxists, especially in the United States. Antifa, that's what? Anybody who's anti-fascist can call themselves Antifa. My understanding was that there was a group of about 200-300 persons who called themselves Antifa, who are primarily involved in doxing or exposing the names and addresses and workplaces of various persons on the right. But I say it's a political swear word. You can't, every day I go online, I see something you'll mention about the right wing doing this, that, and the other thing, and they'll say, well, what about Antifa? They've burned down cities and blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's a mythical Antifa, and then there's a real one. But other than people identifying themselves as anti-fascist, I don't see them as an organization or as a force. As an organization.
Can
Okay,
people join?
we're getting near the end, and we've got a bunch more people. I'm going to ask people to keep the questions down to comments down to 2 minutes. So next up, actually, it's phone number. We don't have a name, 415. If you would go ahead and if you have a question, please unmute yourself and ask.
Yes, hi, it's David. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Sorry, I'm audio only. I've had a prompt for Zoom upgrade, and that hasn't gone through so far. So anyhow, you may well have touched on the answer to the question in a prior caller, maybe 5 ago, and that recent one. But thanks again, Al. Good presentation. In the reading of the synopsis of the presentation, Civil War, of course, speaks of two sides or more than two sides, and we've heard mostly about the ultra right, and in your recent reply, you spoke to Antifa, and on the earlier, you spoke to elements of the left as well. But I guess I'm interested in what if we're talking about sides, as it were, or factions, what those forces might look like. And so again, maybe you've touched on it adequately. I'll just, if there's anything else that comes to mind in that regard, what that would look like.
I'm a little bit nebulous about what you're saying, asking.
That's okay. We're short on time, and I think I've gleaned what I might have wanted to hear from the prior. So
Okay, let's go ahead.
We can drop it there.
Next up is Gene, followed by Michael K. And I think those are going to have to be the last two. We're really at the end of time here. So Gene, if you would unmute yourself.
Okay, well, I don't have much to say. I thank you, Al, so much for your comments. I always appreciate
people
say. And again, there's an old saying, the cops and the Klan go hand in hand. And that's kind of true, I think. And that's something we need to worry about, because they're supposed to enforce the law impartially. And of course, there are questions about the extent to which they do. But again, I'm wearing my Veterans for Peace cap today. And I'm proud of the organization, because it is an organization, that stands for the abolishment of war, and particularly the restraining our own government from participating in wars and intervening, as the U.S. is doing in the Middle East and, of course, elsewhere. So I just wanted to say that. And again, we do believe that although some may think that the abolishment of war is a impossible task, it can't be accomplished, I feel contrary. And I think even if it is, it's still something we should pursue. I mean, when you look at the vestiges of militarism in our country, just the fact that we just had what we call Veterans Day, but is in fact, it was originally conceived, to support veterans. And originally that was Armistice Day, which was a day to celebrate the peace after World War II on the first hour, on the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month. So I just wanted to say that and get Al's reaction to this. And again, thank you so much, Al, for your comments and clarity on this issue.
Okay, my comments are brief. First, Semper Fi to a fellow Marine. I go by the idea that abolishing war is a long-term process. It involves, from a Marxist viewpoint, it involves it involves the abolition of classes, it involves the abolition of the state, and that's not going to happen in our lifetime. What can happen is that we can organize to prevent wars from happening, and we can organize to stop wars that have already started. Those are the two focuses that I have. Abolition, I'll wait for my grandchildren.
Well,
Okay, last questioner is Michael K. So Michael, if you would go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Al, for your talk. It was very enlightening for me. Can you talk about or tell a little bit about the sources that you used in your research so that we can spread those sources around? And specifically, what do you think of the Southern Poverty Law Center as a group that studies this issue? That's one question. And the second question is, can you say again about the groups you are in? I believe you mentioned a Friedrich Engels group, and I think you mentioned a George Brown group. And can you talk about those just very briefly so that we can find them? Thank you.
Okay. I said at the beginning that I really don't have any sources to share with you. You can Google books about white supremacism, or Google books about hate. A lot of the books have titles like Homegrown Hate, or Hate in the States, things like that, topics like that, which are actually books by social science researchers on the subject. You can also find articles if you just Google, white supremacist groups, et cetera, et cetera. The Southern Poverty Law Firm, I omitted a lot about specific research organizations that deal with that. Southern Poverty Law is one of them, which is a very good source of information. There's another called the Political Research Associates, which is also online, which is good for dealing with it. You might also Google the research groups that study white supremacism, because there's about 15 or 20 universities that have organizations just devoted to that, including UC Berkeley at the Right-Wing Studies Association, I think I call it. What you made one other point? Oh, yeah, Friedrich Engels. The Friedrich Engels Institute for the Study of Marxist War and Military. I formed that around 2007 with one other person, with the goals of education, and I have a website. You can if you want to get on the get more than enough daily articles about the issues of war and the military from a whole bunch of perspectives and a whole bunch of issues. You can reach me at BIGALS as in Sam, E as in employment, Z as in Zog. Big Al Says at yahoo.com, and I'll put you on the list. And you can contact me if you want books or articles. Okay, I can send you the names of those.
Okay, thank you very much, Al, for your presentation. Thank you, everybody, for participating. We want to invite you to come back next week for our session on the 200 years of the Monroe Doctrine. So with that, I think we're going to stop the recording, and we'll see you guys next week.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, at yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.